Well, good evening. Let's go ahead and get started, if we may. Good evening. I am Tom Burrows, Commissioner at Large, District 2. Tonight, however, I will be acting as Mayor Pro Tem due to the unavailability of Mayor Garner. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that we will have individuals attending remotely as well as on site. All participants joining by phone should mute their phones when not speaking to avoid background noise. During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and every time you speak so the public that is participating knows who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General. Please be sure you are speaking into a microphone to ensure your comments are heard and an accurate record is made. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask the clerk to please call roll.
Good evening. You are hereby notified that I have called a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, to be conducted in a hybrid format on Thursday, March 7th, 2024 at 5 p.m. for a special session regarding emergency preparedness training in the fifth floor conference room of the Municipal Office Building, 701 North 7th Street, Kansas City, Kansas. Roll call. Ramirez.
Here.
Hill. Here. Kane.
Here.
Lopez.
Here.
Lights, we have an absence memo. Davis, we have an absence memo. Bynum. Here. Townsend.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Burrows.
Here. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Tonight, we will hear a report and information from our Emergency and Management Department regarding emergency preparedness training. I'll ask our County Administrator, Mr. David Johnston, if he has any opening remarks this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Last year, there was a request from the commission to get briefed on what is emergency management, the role of the commission in emergency management. In my training, this is imperative because we have to be ready, not if an emergency happens, but when an emergency happens. It will happen sometime. And so we got to be on our game. What's nice, most communities, most counties have an emergency management department. We have one. Matt is here to guide us through an orientation, for lack of a better term. So I'll pass this on to Matt. Matt?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this to you. With me is Susan McMahon. She's our deputy director and the head planner, among many other things lately. We've been doing lots of stuff downstairs. So it's been kind of crazy. So I guess we're ready to jump right into it, Monica, if you can. So what we are going to cover tonight is a little bit about what emergency management is, what its role is, how your leadership fits into that in a response, and then a little bit about how to best prepare yourselves to be able to do that. So we'll do that a little bit. So here's the textbook definition of what emergency management is. If you look it up, that's right out of a FEMA document. I won't read to you. I know you all have this in your books, so forth. We'll zip right through this. This gentleman is Mike Selves. He used to be the president of the International Emergency Management Association, and he was also a good friend. He was the emergency management director in Johnson County, and I've known him for a very long time. He was testifying before Congress, and he made this statement, and I literally used to have this until recently on my wall. What is it? It's the process of making public officials think about things they don't want to think about. How about spend money they don't have and prepare for things they don't believe will ever happen. So that's kind of sometimes my job, is to bring what the issues are to light, let you guys to make a decision about what the priority is, and then we take that out to the field. And so that's that statement. And then last but not least, one of my personal favorites, we do precision guesswork based on unreliable data by people of questionable knowledge. That's sometimes the reality. It's not always. I just do that because it takes a little edge off of it. Sometimes we have to be a little light about it. So we look about emergency management in 4 phases. We talk about preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. The concept here is that the interesting part about this is not in any kind of decent chronological order. Response gets the most attention, but it's actually almost always the very shortest piece of the event. And we typically denote that by the end of the life safety concerns. I mean, the minute we think we ever got everybody safe, we've done away with if it's a hazardous material spill, we've cleaned up the bad stuff and moved on. Recovery, however, can take a very long time. If you're familiar with the EF5 tornado that hit Joplin about 15, 16 years ago, they are still in recovery. They have not gotten back to what I would consider to be a normal stance, and they're still working that problem. So just know that these things can, and preparedness is exactly what we're doing tonight. It's a nonstop, never-ending process of being educated, being prepared, knowing what the expectations are, and then mitigation is, if we can do it, let's make the problem go away. We have lots of authorities and standards and guidance. I believe these are linked in your electronic documents, or no? It's okay. All right. So, but these are the statutes that we follow from the state. The resolutions that we've adopted locally. We'll talk about the last one there, and was in 07. I think it was updated, or 83. Yeah, 07 was updated. The National Incident Management System. We'll talk a little bit about that, how we all fit into that. But it's some national standards for how we're going to all operate together. That's very helpful when you're requesting resources from other places, because if I say to them, I want you to come in and work in my EOC and ESF 4, person doing that's going to pretty much know, if they know these standards, what that's going to entail. So they're not going to come in and be surprised. So that's what those resolutions are that are in play. This is our current organizational chart down in my spaces. Like I said, Susan's here with us, and Pete is a fairly new hire, but he's out doing a public event tonight with at the junior college with STEM students. So he's having a good time. We want to lead communities to address their threats and hazards. It's one of the first things we do. We work on a very, Susan's deep in the middle of this right now, of reviewing a document we call our hazard mitigation plan. That helps us identify what those potential hazards are, what our basic resources are, and where we're going to have gaps, helps us identify those gaps. So becoming acquainted with those threats and hazards that have the potential to cause us life and property. Does everybody know that we have potentially, depending on how you measure, the largest rail yard in the country here? Okay. That means there's a whole lot of stuff that we probably wouldn't want to be around going through that yard all the time. And so I work really hard to develop good rapport with those units. We're going to do an exercise with BNSF. I think prior to me being here, we hadn't really focused on that, and having a relationship good enough with them that they ask us to come and play and I'm going to help them develop their exercise. We can provide them an easy resource. It's really just a little bit of my time, and relationships with the fire department predominantly, because most of their threat is hazardous materials. And we're going to bring those parties together in a couple of months. I'm going to have a decent little operational exercise. And we want to engage the emergency management personnel. That's not just us here. There are emergency management personnel in almost every major corporation. Everybody from Disney on down. You never want to think of the Mickey Mouse Land having problems, but they do. And they have emergency managers who are there writing their plans, identifying their threats and risks, just like we're talking about tonight. And then build that collaboration between the community and government and the response entities and the resources. And we build that more and more. Susan's been working really hard on a recovery plan. Recently, the feds and we agreed. We really need to have a standalone plan, have it not buried in our response plan, but be able to make sure that we're prepared for that long haul recovery plan. And how are we going to engage? Because it engages a very different group of people. A lot more, less response agencies and a lot more community agencies, chambers of commerce, et cetera, et cetera. So we look to them and business groups like the Fairfax district and things like that. So we try to get them all together to make sure that we're all on the same page and to give them a platform to put in their input. If you're interested, here are our top 5 threats and hazards based on the current plan. We are, like I said, in the midst of rewriting this plan, so this will probably change a little bit. Usually they just kind of flip-flop around. The top 5, 6, 7 don't go away very far, but flooding is right now our biggest concern. Windstorms, and that's for a variety of reasons. That's true. We're doing a lot of work to prevent that, like Corps and working with the Corps and so forth, raising levees, doing those kinds of things to try and minimize that impact. But we still are looking at that. Windstorms, a lot of damage can come from the windstorms, particularly with utilities. We have utility and infrastructure failures. If we flood out and the train tracks are all buried underwater, the local power plants, for the most part, really rely on coal coming in by rail, and they're going to have to look at alternative fuel sources. And what are they doing about that? Drought, we know what that's like because we're in the middle of one, despite the fact that it's raining right now. And then hazardous materials incidents. We've had several of those. A lot of them are fairly easy for us to resolve and get dealt with. Some of them can be very, very dangerous. I still have a picture on my laptop that shows the tank over at the ConocoPhillips facility burning. I was working for Mark at the time and was looking out the window, and I had a great view of it and got this great picture. And I keep that on there to remind me what can happen. It was really well handled, but it can be a big deal. Underneath that are the ones you probably are also thinking of, which is winter storms and tornadoes. They come in 6th and 7th. So they're out there. What's your role in that? Well, you have lots of them. Look at all the bullet points, right? So one is we're all responsible for, trying to ensure the safety of the citizens, protection of the property, continuity of government, activating specific legal authorities, utilizing those disaster declarations. That's a role the mayor or the mayor pro tem would play once we identify what the threat is, and we want to let the state know that we're engaged. The first thing we do is write a very simple, it's really just a few sentences, paragraphs, a paragraph or two that we send to them to tell us that we are engaging in a response. The PIOs have a huge role in this. We got to keep the public informed. We got to make sure that they know what's happening and get them good information about how to respond. We're going to request assistance. I'll show you that more in a slide later. Coordinating with other elected officials. That could be neighbors, that could be Edwardsville, Bonner, the other counties, surrounding counties, and then growing across the state line. We cross that state line routinely, and we try as much as we can from our emergency management standpoint to make that be as non-issue as we can. And then we can also participate in multi-agency coordination groups. So we can create a group, let's say it's primarily a fire issue. We have a large fire that's going on. We'll put multiple responders from different agencies together in a room to try and help develop some of the things that we need, like goals and objectives, and bring those to you guys for approval. And then you have a responsibility for your own personal preparedness. You cannot come here and do the job you need to do if you have to worry about what's going on at home. And that's understandable. So when we get to the end, we'll give you some tips about how to do that for yourself and how to move forward. Questions about those? I'll stop for a minute. That's a lot to take in. Okay. Within the National Incident Management System, there is some parts that are really important. And it is, again, it's a standard that we work across the country based on. A lot of it has evolved out of California and Florida because they get a lot of events. They've had a lot of time to practice this. And then we have nationalized that probably about 15 years ago. And they just recently, and by recently, I mean 2017, did a really thorough rebuild of what NIMS was all about. And so there's some classwork I can show you. There's some free online classes that you can look at if you want to get a little bit deeper taste of it than I can afford to do here for time. Here's a good chart that kind of gives you what it is and what it isn't. Again, comprehensive approach, nationwide, systematic, concepts and principles, scalable, flexible, adaptable. We can make it be what we need it to be to effectively respond to an event. Standardized resource management, we call that resource typing. And so a truck is not always a truck, is not always a truck. I know of an event where they asked for a food truck. And what they got was a guy who sells corn dogs out of the back of a little pickup truck. And what they really wanted was one of the food trucks from one of the big organizations, Southern Baptist, the Methodists do this. They tend to be faith-based groups. And they'll roll in with 2 or 3 tractor trailers and they'll be able to make 10, 15,000 meals in a day. And it's an amazing thing to watch. And it's been great to work with those folks. So, but you got to know what you're asking for. And so they've provided a mechanism for how to ask for the right thing to get what you need. Essential principles for communications and information management. That's key. We can't go forward if we don't know what's going on either amongst us or outside of us. Incident command system. This is typically a field terminology. This is how the responders are going to work in the field. It gives them a predetermined structure with predetermined boxes, if you will, for the elements that need to be addressed. It just gives a consistency to it. It gives common terminology, those kinds of things. And within the EOC, we actually follow something very similar to it So we use for example, in the incident command system, they develop a plan for how they're going to react. And it's done really out in the field. And they call that an incident action plan. Well, we're not operational out in the field. We're here being their support team. And so I call mine an incident support plan. And some of the terminology is exactly the same, and some of it's a little bit different, mostly to keep up with confusion from out in the field. If somebody comes in and says, yeah, I'm the branch section chief, I know that's a field person. If you come in and say, I'm the situational assessment coordinator, then I know that you're in the EOC. And just to keep that straight, it's the same position on the org chart, and you'll see that here in a second, but that's the idea. Again, what are we doing in the EOC? I always narrow it down to two things, really. We're information collection and dissemination, and we're also doing resource management. I need 20 generators. I only have 5. Who's going to get them? How do we do that? Can we make them work? Can we find more? All those things fall, generally speaking, within the EOC. So we in the EOC will come and ask you as leadership to help us develop some parts to that. One is we want a set of goals and objectives. And that's almost always starts out with life safety, protect property, protect the environment. Those are usually the top ones on the list. But after that, what do we do? What's the priority that we need to focus on? And then we go from that to building missions. And usually that's by response group. So fire is going to do a mission, PD's doing a mission, public works is doing a mission, and so forth. And then within that, what tasks need to be done to accomplish that mission? So once you build up from the bottom, and then we help support that task element by making sure they have the supplies they need, the people they need, the equipment they need, the trucks they need, whatever it is. So take the example of if you have to build a sandbag levee to keep water out of a particular part of town. What's the goal? Keep water out of town. What's the mission? Build a sandbag levee. What's the task? Find bags, get sand, find people to fill bags, seal them up, put them on a truck, move them where they need to go. It's just that structure. It's just done over and over and over again for different multiple objectives. And you can have a lot of objectives or you can have just a few, but that'll be a piece that we will come to you with and say, here's what we think the objectives might be. We'd like your consideration on this. Does that make sense? We all good? Okay. Again, you can see we're liaisoning with partners where we want to support the policies and legal needs of the decision makers, et cetera. So here's how that kind of works. Once an incident starts, we have the usual response, right? Dispatch is involved, police, fire, EMS is involved, public works is involved, and we hopefully get notified and we'll say, okay, what do you need from us? All right, let's look around the city and see if we can find whatever that need is. You need 10 forklifts to lift a pile of something off of a particular site. Okay, we can work on that. And here the city and the county transition sometimes is pretty seamless. So we get there, but in other jurisdictions, it's a little more structured. We have one here in the Kansas City area that's a little different than a lot of other places in that we have regional resources and we have a whole plan that looks very similar to our response plan that's built on that same structure. It uses the same nomenclature and layout. So we go to the region first because it's easy and it's fast and we know what they have because we play together all the time. If we run out within the region of something, say we run out of sandbags, right? Where can we get them? Well, we would reach back to the state and say, hey, can you get us a supply of blah, 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 whatever it is. Yep, sure can. We'll send them to you. Okay. Well, at some point they may run out of stuff or they may not have ever had it. They might have come up with something they don't have. So then they can make that request to the federal government and see if they can supply that. Usually when they get to that level, we're looking at getting aircraft resources, if we're doing a firefight or something like that, a large wildland fire, which isn't likely here, but it's on the list. Does that all make sense? That's the progression. To do that, it all starts at the beginning with that declaration that we sign off on early on, and then we can provide that to the state. The state says, okay, you got a deck in play, we get it, we're going to move on, and then the state will create a declaration of their own. Actually, they call it a proclamation at that point. The governor signs off on that, sends it to the feds, and particularly ultimately the president signs off on it, and then FEMA can start to supply us resources. It takes time, and sometimes it comes with a bill behind it too. So we need to be aware of that, make sure you're aware of that so you know what we're committing to. So bad things happen. How do you know about it? Well, we're going to use a multitude of different methods to do that. We will reach out to you. The CAO, an assistant county administrator, is typically the director of the EOC. And they're going to say, yes, let's send out a message, and here's who we need to call. Here's who we need to send an email to. Here's who we need to send a text. We have a system called Everbridge that can do all of that. You're probably all familiar with that. You've probably gotten those messages from time to time already. But it provides a multi-mode way of contacting you. Can it get annoying? Yes, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to get you to answer. If you'll actually acknowledge the message, it should stop. Outlook, maybe it's not that time sensitive, but we're trying to keep you abreast of what's going on. So we will send you something in email. If you've gotten our situation reports, that's a typical thing that we send just by email because it's not as time critical. And then if we have something individual we have to work on, somebody we know who has a specific resource, we might ask to do a direct contact. That's usually after we've kind of fired things up. It'll all be situationally dependent. Again, we talked about Everbridge. That's that multifaceted tool. There are lots of tools like that, but it's one of the leaders in the industry right now for doing this. You can send a text, a fax, an email, a voice, and it can go both directions. You can go from text to speech, or it can go the other way. So depending on what your situation is. The UG is currently using it for internal and team notification, and we're doing a little exploratory work on whether we should start to include that into mass notification. And we've talked about that. This is our org chart. I know it's small. It's in your books. It's in your in a much easier to read format towards the back. Again, we are ICS-like. We are incident command system structure is similar. You'll see those same 4 columns. If you're out in the field, we refer to it as the FLOP because it's finance, operations, logistics, and planning. That's the part below the long horizontal line. Everything above that's command staff. Everybody below that's in one of those 4 categories. That all makes sense? There's a couple of spots in your book where we can reference to that. Hang on, I'll get to it. Green tab? Okay, it's at the very back and just past that green tab. Thank you. There's a couple other things on your senior officials checklist. You're going to find that on page 32 and 33. And I think the one comment I would make about that long list of checkboxes is one of the key goals of that checkbox list is to remove barriers from us getting those other jobs done. So help us find out how we can get past those stopping points. You can see they're broken into pre-disaster, during the disaster, and then major emergency tasks. And we look at these every time and say that applies today and that doesn't. I know last time we had legal down in the EOC, we asked him to put things into WebEOC for us. And I wasn't sure if Ken was happy about that or not, but he seemed to be when we were all done. So, so after the disaster, there's still work to do. Like I said, that can be the longest piece of this if you're in recovery. So be prepared for that. You'll see on 39, the continuum of how recovery works as far as there's a lot of overlap. You'll see we'll start one piece and as we're ending another piece. And that's all you've already seen. And I said earlier, remember that an EOC is not a response element, right? We're not out putting wet stuff on hot stuff or, putting people in jail. We are a support team for all that. And we sometimes will come asking for something. Why would you want that? You're not out there. Because somebody out there asked for it. That's why we're coming and looking for that. Okay. All right. What is the planning P? How does this all structure together? It's really, again, part of that nationalized standard for how we're all going to play together. The things in the bottom in phase 1, those are things you're going to do one time. So you've got incident happens, bang, as I call it, notification, initial response and assessment. We're going to build up an incident brief, right? Somebody in the EOC is going to go around and collect up information that we know right this minute. It may change in the next 5 minutes, but we're going to write up what we think we know now, and we're going to get that out to you. If you're already in, we're going to hand that out locally and within the EOC. If you're not here, we're going to send it out by one of those other communication methods. And then we're going to start with an initial meeting. How do we want to move forward? What resources do we have out there? What else do we need to do? Remember, I said the first thing to do is develop or update the incident objectives. So you're going to come up with goals for us. We're going to build objectives out of that. And that's what the people are going to work on for us. Let me click one more time. There you go. So there's goals. And then you have missions that come out of the command staff. That's a different group of people, right? So now we just got the leadership from each of these response organizations joining in with us with the planning team. And then we develop a list of tasks, and that's in the tactics meeting. That's those operational people out in the field. They're going to figure out how we're going to do whatever it is we've decided we need to get done. And so that's how this works. We get through this, and I would please caution you that this is chronologically not all balanced like this. There's a whole lot of freneticness going on in the first left-hand side, and then it kind of slows down. We get into the planning meeting, that can be like 12 hours. By the time we get around, we get a plan built for the next 12-hour period. We invite the operations folks to come in and be briefed on it. We get their concurrent on it, that they agree that that's the way to go forward. And then we execute that plan. And so typically the way I like to run an EOC is about in 12-hour shifts, like 2 shifts of 12, and a little half an hour overlap on each end, so that you're back briefing each other as you do that shift change. If as things slow down or it becomes more routine or it's going to be more long-term, we probably go to 3/8 if we need to maintain a 24-hour presence. Sometimes we'll just have a few elements there in the later evening hours, and we go back to daylight, we'll ramp back up. So it just depends on the situation. Another thing to know about is we talked earlier about a lot of working together, and we do a lot of that here in the region. And I can tell you from having talked all over the country with people about how we do things here, we get a lot of questions. Exactly that. How do you pull that off? Some of our folks won't even talk to each other. How do you do that? And I said, well, you know, first off, I think there's a little bit of Midwest ethic that says we're going to play nice. That's always good, right? I know I like the fire chief's nomenclature lately has been a lot about playing nice. I think that's right. The other part is we've had our own events that, although they're not a World Trade Center type event, those of us who have been around long enough to remember the Hyatt Regency collapse, that was an event that really, those people now are in senior leadership roles that were line officers or line firemen at the time. And they can hold that, whatever we're talking about doing, whatever effort we're talking about putting out, they hold it up to that light. Would that have worked on that day? And that really helps us narrow down what's feasible and practical and what's not. So how do we work together? We go from an incident command, which is typically a single person, to a unified command, which might be multiple jurisdictions. Now, unfortunately, these events don't necessarily respect our jurisdictional boundaries. So how do we get everybody to play? Well, we put them all together in a room and say, do you all agree that this is the direction we ought to go? And what are we missing? And then sometimes there needs to be a liaison officer. So you see that in the right-hand side, we have lots of different terms, a MAC, a multi-agency coordination center. It's actually an MACC. We have dispatch centers who act as that resource finder until we get the EOC spooled up. Jurisdictional EOCs, each jurisdiction in the metro here generally has one. Some of them are very simplistic. They'd be in a room like this. Some of them are as wonderful as ours is downstairs. And by that, I really mean that. That's a lot of space and we take good advantage of it, and we're going to continue to do that. DOCs, if a department is the one who needs to have more resources, and maybe it's just a fire event, they might open up their own departmental operations center. I know Olathe has one, several others do. The city of Kansas City, Missouri has one. And every agency or department needs to decide if that's valuable to them. Otherwise, they're more than welcome to come in and join us. That EOC can become theirs. And then JICs, Joint Information Center, Joint Information Communications, that's a whole separate animal, and we kind of like to keep them all together so that they can share information, make sure that each jurisdiction knows what the other one's going to push out to the public so we don't contradict each other. There's a lot of good social science out there about how people react to things. Everybody says the public will panic. Public just generally doesn't do that. Generally, if they get misinformation or conflicting information, they tend to do nothing, which can be just as bad for them. So what we want to make sure is we aren't doing that. We aren't giving conflicting statements. And the best way to do that is have those people who are putting those statements together work together to build a common language and common concepts to push out. What am I missing? I can feel something. Good. Okay. Yeah. So the last part I'd like to talk about is how you can make yourself better prepared. Because again, you're not going to feel comfortable coming here if you're worried about what's going on elsewhere. And one of those things is education. The FEMA has developed a huge I don't know, thousands of classes. They've spent our money wisely from my standpoint, and they've done a good job of maintaining, in other words, updating them, keeping them fresh. Originally, they were a lot of text and a few pictures. Now there's a lot of video, a lot of interactive multimedia going on in those classes. So this is the structure we ask a lot of folks to do. 100 and 700 are the classes that review the incident command system and the national, I'm looking for 700 on there. There it is. National Incident Management System. So NIMS and ICS. And then 200 and 800 are our next level of that. Those are great if you're out in the field. Having 100 and 700, I think, is good for everybody. But once you get past that, 200, 400, 300, those are really designed for people who are responders out in the field. However, there are a couple of classes that you would greatly benefit from because they're designed specifically for people who are going to be in the EOC. One is the 2300 class. That's an in-person class. It's 3 days, I think. Yeah, so it's a big commitment to make, but it's worth it. You'll get a lot out of it if you can get to it. But you can start with the IS, and IS stands for Independent Study. You do these online, you do them at your own pace. You can get a certification. Most of them are 4 hours or less, and you can do them over time. You know, you can take an hour a night or something. And I know you guys read lots of stuff and have lots of commitments on your time. I totally get that. There's also a professional development series. Actually, there's now an advanced professional development series. Those are about emergency management, some. More, it's about leadership. And it's a great thing to give even subordinates who want to learn how to better lead in these environments. And so there's a lot of groups who use leadership and influence, decision-making, problem-solving, effective communication. That applies to almost everything we do. So you might take a look at that. These are the two I would highly recommend for everybody today in the room. So there is a full class that basically is this very short and truncated version called 908. Emergency Management for Senior Officials. Again, that's an independent study class. Take that at your leisure. And it'll give you kind of a more deep dive into what we've kind of barely touched on today. And then again, that IS 2200 gives you an idea about how an EOC operates and what its goals and objectives are, and know that we are set up following the guidelines that are in 2200 pretty closely if you look at it as an ICS like setup. And lastly, prepare yourself, get some education, decide what's important. I always tell people I have to be better prepared than everybody else in the room because I have to be ready to come over here when everybody else is going away, as they should. And so, and that includes my wife. You know, I get her prepared. I know what she's going to do. When my in-laws were still here, we knew it. We were going to pick them up. We were going to go, and we had places to go down in Lynn County. And that seemed like it might be far enough away until Wolf Creek got something bad. And then we want to go the other direction, right? So it's all situationally dependent, but be prepared for that. Know what your plan is. Doesn't have to be terribly complex, but don't hide that plan either. And one of my favorite one is communications. Who knows you're okay? Tell somebody way far away from the event, Aunt Matilda, Grandma, whomever, and then make sure everybody else knows to check in with them too. So even if you can't get together, I worked an event down in Florida and in South Georgia where the Flint River had exceeded its banks and every single bridge was out. You had to go 200 miles to get around. And so what happened is people got caught on either side and they didn't know if one was okay or the other was okay, but they weren't without resources. They just didn't know where to call them at. And this is long before there was a good population of cell phones. Yes, I'm that old. So call somebody, let them know, have that other person call somebody, let them know. Aunt Matilda will know, and then she'll be able to tell you all. You'll call her again in, an hour and find out everybody checked in, everybody's fine, here's where they are, and they'll get over to you as soon as they can. So just tip like that about things to do to prepare yourself. What you want to pack out, a go kit is incredibly important. I tend to build mine in old leftover gym bags. You can look at me and see most of my gym bags don't get used a lot. So, and what you might ask, what should I put in it? I will tell you, if you Google jump bag or go kit, you will find thousands of ideas, but the top 20 items will be the same in every single one. It'll be clothes. It'll be a change of shoes. For whatever reason, these things happen and you end up scampering downstairs in the basement in your bare feet or your slippers. Put an old pair of tennies in there. You're going to be appreciative of that. Medicines, take a 30-day supply of something, throw it in. That's harder to get nowadays. Most insurance companies don't want to give more than a 30-day supply out, but if you explain that that's what you're using it for, and then remember to rotate that, take that out, use it, and then put new stuff back in. All of those ideas are at these 3 sites. And again, if you look at your electronic copy of this, Kansas Ready has a great list of stuff. The Red Cross has some awesome stuff. If you want notifications, that's another great tool. They have a tool called Red Cross Ready, I think is the title of it. But if you do Red Cross in an app, it has the ability to tell you when there's tornado warnings out. And I always talk about warnings like that as a puzzle picture puzzle. The more pieces you have to the puzzle, the better idea you have about what's going on. It creates what we call a common operating picture. And so do them all. Look for our notifications, listen for the outdoor warning sirens. All that's going to do is tell you something bad's happening and you need to go and find out what it is and take cover and do that simultaneously. Weather radio is another great source of information. There are a ton of apps out there that you can look at that will tell you stuff. Weather Channel has a great one, but that Red Cross one is one of the best that we've found as far as getting the notifications from national weather and putting them out there. And you can put up to 5 different addresses. So it doesn't have to be here. Again, I try to keep tabs on my mom. That's challenging at times. And she's in Southeast Michigan. So I put her address in there. And so I get these messages when nothing else is going on around here because I'm getting a message that they're having a rough time. And then I have to call her and say, are you doing what you're supposed to do? Because sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. And then Prepare Metro KC, that's put out by the emergency managers, is again a subset of MARC. We put data in there. It changes constantly. Of course, when COVID was around, it was very COVID centric. That's all kind of dropped off. We're back to rebuilding it to be kind of an all hazards site. But all that stuff's always there. You just have to kind of dig for it. But those go kits, suggestions, all that kind of thing. It's all great. Questions, thoughts, concerns, committee? Commissioner Ramirez?
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. Thank you for the presentation and for all you do. I think the previous commission, we had a crash course in emergency management and the planning phases when COVID hit our community. I definitely did. I was 2 months into my first term when COVID happened and having to deal with the crisis and all. I have several questions. I'll quickly go through I made a couple notes. For the slide that shows the top 5 threats and hazards, the number 3 was the utility infrastructure failure due to, in 21, what happened with the SPP in Texas.
Right.
Do we know if Texas has done what they need to do to ensure that doesn't happen again?
Right up to you said need to do, I was going good. Yes, they've made changes. Things are different. I think that the industry was allowed to do some things that they probably shouldn't have been allowed to do as monopolies. And I don't think we're going to see that happen again, but it's not impossible. Again, I think everybody agrees that our climatological situation is different. They're getting different types of storms, deep cold weather strikes, and that impacts them. I think they're going to plan towards that, but that takes a long time to get from that threat to a finished increased capacity. So I would say that's still a possibility. It's probably not near as much as it was before. I think they're paying more attention to it, and certainly we are. I've learned how to watch that better myself. So
Okay, good. Going back to, you use the the circles within the circles to show the different, how to receive the resources.
Yep.
You use the scenario if you need 10 forklifts.
Yep.
Now, do you go out to just any business, any organization that has forklifts and ask if you can use them, or how does that work?
it depends on what it is. There are some things that we know we're going to need. We've already made arrangements with them, like generators is one of my favorite examples. So we've already talked to some of the rental agencies and said, will you make sure to set aside X number of units for us? And we have to make commitments to them to do that, right? So when we see the need coming, if we do, hey, are you ready for tomorrow? Because we'd like to set aside 10 gen sets. And we try to spread that work out because we don't want everybody to be depleted. We want them to continue to do their business, but we also want to make sure that they have what we need too. Generators are not generators. There's a whole bunch of different kinds. You have to know what to do with them. And do we have the electricians to hook them up properly and so forth and so on. So that's just one example of a multitude of different things that we have a list of resources. Another one of my favorites is if you're not familiar with the New Madrid Fault over on the east side of Missouri, that's going to be a huge problem for us. We've all now gotten to experience, at least indirectly or directly, what it looks like when 600,000 people go down to Liberty Memorial. That's kind of a mess. And that's probably what's going to happen to us if we have a large scale New Madrid Fault response, because those people are going to get stuck on this side of the river and they're not going to have any resources until they'll be lucky if they get resources even at Columbia. They're going to be coming this way looking for stuff. They're going to be looking for gasoline. They're going to be looking for a place to stay. They're going to be looking for dialysis, one of my favorite ones, because we really don't have enough capacity there. And so how do we make sure that we've got what they're going to need? So in that particular example, fuel is a big issue. So are there going to be enough gas stations that have power? Because without power, they're not pumping anything. So can we take a 8,000 gallon tanker and turn it into a pump? Yep, sure can. Without power, because it gravity feeds. So is it slow? Yes. Does it have challenges? Yes. But if that's the only way we're going to get it done, I actually have a list. I think last time I counted, it was there. We have 8 vendors who have that kind of capacity. What if we have vehicles and generators and things out in the field that need to be tendered? They need to be refilled. They need to have their oils changed. We've got people who can do that. That's a different list. So we try to keep up on that. I will tell you that's one of the biggest challenges we have. Susan gets stuck with this a lot, is keeping up with that list, making sure they're current. Oh, that guy went out of business. Okay, who took over? Who's a better solution? Who has a unique solution? We're constantly working to make sure that we have the best information. We rely very heavily on our subject matter experts. So, if we need something to support fire, we're going to lean back on the fire guys and say, you got to tell us where to find that. How many more ambulances do we need? Well, fortunately, in the state of Kansas, we have a statewide organization that is prepared to help acquire and deploy additional resources. I saw that work very well down in Greensburg. We had more ambulances down there than we'd ever imagined we could muster. And they were often the only, we were talking earlier about the fact that it gets very dark when you go to a place like that that has no power, no lights. It's really hard to navigate. And it turned out that the ambulances had the best lighting. So because they had lights not only on the front and back, but on the sides as well. So those are all the kind of resources we have to look towards.
Okay, thank you. And just two more and I'm done. I think the mass notification, I know that is something you and I have had a conversation with Crystal McFetters as well. We've had that conversation, and I've had conversation with Commissioner Bynum about the idea, and I think it's needed. I know, we have communication or notification systems within for internal use and for team notifications, as was stated. I think it's highly beneficial if we had a mass notification system, just as Johnson County does. So I believe that is something, and I hope with administration, that is something we can bring forward soon and hopefully within this year's budget so that we can fund something like that, because it's, we all are elected to be part of this government and we are in charge of the safety, health, and well-being of our community. So I highly encourage that we really look into this and come up with a way we can create a mass notification system. And the last thing goes to the when an incident happens, the briefings and all of the meetings that happen that go along with that incident. Is it common? Because I know a lot of information is shared, things happen, things change within minutes, seconds. Is it common throughout where when briefings are happening, notes are taken, and then those notes are shared with the electeds of the policy-making body?
Absolutely, they do get notated. I will also tell you that because we're usually under a time situation with those, they don't tend to be terribly verbose.
Yeah.
So there might be a need to go to that particular ESF and say, can you explain to me exactly how you're getting this done? But the goal or the objective or the mission will be laid out in those for sure.
Okay.
And even down to the task, although sometimes the tasks get kind of clumped together. So to be honest with you, but we will, and that documentation builds on itself. So that becomes that incident support plan.
Yep.
And here's this stack, right? And then the next day we add to that. So that stack kind of grows over time. I think the Greensburg Incident Action Plan, again, similar, was over 1,000 pages when they got down to the last days. Be quite hefty, but it gives you the whole book. You can see it from day one to day whatever. And if you really are interested and you're really digging in, how did we get to where we are today? Because we started out here. And the book becomes not only an operational document, which is what it's really intended to be, but also becomes a historical document.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all that you do.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else?
Anyone else? Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. May, thanks to you and Ms. McMahon for all you do. I have a real appreciation for your department. I think it's because my neighborhood was impacted and my household was impacted by the '03 tornado. And I think that's kind of what heightened my awareness way back when. But you have in the slide deck your organizational chart. So you're authorized for 5 positions, is that correct? And you're at 3 out of the 5.
That is correct.
So you're at 60% staff right now.
Correct.
As far as the 2 vacant, are there applicants on the horizon, or what's up with that?
I will be very honest with you. I've had the admin position open for several months. I had an applicant. She chose to go to another department here in the UG, and I understand that. Gave her something she was looking for. And since then, I really haven't gotten what I would call a quality applicant. This is not just an answering the phones kind of job. This is somebody who's going to be managing our grant programs. In an ideal world, they would probably be an accountant and have that background so that they can help us get through those
Right.
financial documentation issues, which, the UG with Workday and so forth have made that better, certainly, but it's still a lot of work. And we're in the middle of one right now. That's a public assistance grant that we're trying to collect back money on, get reimbursed on for expenses that we had back in July. Yeah. So, and we're meeting literally every week with the feds to talk about that and see where we are and what documentation we need. If we have somebody who's, a good portion of their job is to manage that for us down there, it really frees us up, Susan, myself and others, to do the more boots on the ground kind of work if they're doing that. I think the problem that we have is that we probably need to look at that market from a different lens and not just look at it by the title, which is an administrative assistant. It's much more than that. And I think that's because our environment down there in the basement is very unique. And we ask a lot more of people. The gentleman we have right now who's supporting our radio system really doesn't have a ton of radio system experience, but he has a great organizational background. And so we're leveraging what he has to get us to where we want to be. And he's going to learn tomorrow how to update our licenses in the FCC database. So he's learning, but we were lucky to find him and his willingness to take that position for what it was and then make it into something that's what we need. So there's challenges ahead.
Okay. And yet at the same time, you're actively trying to fill the 2 positions
We
that
are.
you have. Okay, thanks for that. My only other question is, will you be taking this presentation and opportunity for training to the Bonner Springs and Edwardsville city councils so that they too can be looped in on all of this?
If you think it's appropriate, I absolutely will offer to them because they're just as likely to be in the EOC as any of you. So
I think it would be great to
we'll do that.
approach them in whatever way is appropriate to ask to be on their agenda to bring this to them. However that's appropriate. Thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, Mr. May, and welcome, Ms. Mann. I've got a lot of questions. As I think about disasters, lived in New Orleans for a while, so I'm recalling what happened with there and trying to figure out what is the role of government, us, compared to what we, and you alluded this earlier, as individuals have to take responsibility for. But I guess my first question would be, in the event, heaven forbid, of a disaster that impacts this building, what would be the alternative plan for a command center?
That's an excellent question. And we actually got to exercise that about the last, 35, 40 days? Yeah, it's been a minute. So because we got flooded out of our spaces.
Mhm.
That's really was most impactful for us and a few other of the departments like the mailroom at the clerk's office and so forth. And we already had a plan developed. We had worked with our partners at the Speedway. And they offered us their space and we camped out there for several weeks. And we just recently got back last week. So, and even now, we're still very much in a rebuilding process down there. So, but we were lacking some resources. I think we all feel better now. But you have to have a plan, and that's really a departmental plan. And a lot of the departments, Susan handles this, we call this COOP, or continuity of operations.
Mhm.
And she's been working with them to help develop their own plans. We obviously allocated a lot. The reason that worked good for us is because we do it twice a year anyway.
Mm.
Go out for every race we set up. So I said, I usually go out there and set up. I got to go do this. They did that. 4 hours, 5 hours, we were operational out there. We could have conducted, albeit a little bit smaller one, we could have conducted a full EOCM. So it's about looking at, again, going back to Mike Self's statement. Don't sit here and think that it can't happen. It's a lack of imagination that sometimes catches us flat.
Mhm.
And yet we look at every one of these events as an opportunity to learn. And so we've already got a list of things we're going to do differently the next time we have to do it. And how we're going to prepare better. But we're still in recovery.
I'm glad that worked out for you all. I have the broader question is, heaven forbid, this entire building. You talked about the Joplin tornado. I remember that basically leveled, the whole city. Do we have alternative plans for continuity to set up somewhere else?
I'll let Susan speak to that because that's really her gig.
So with that, that's where that continuity of operations comes into. We got to test that during COVID. So they hadn't worked from home before, and we were able to acquire laptops and all the equipment that our employees that needed to be able to work from home. And it was a brand new transition that our employees really never had worked through before. And they adjusted and adapted very well for those that could. The others, we mitigated this situation and we rotated teams. If we have another building that only 20 people can fit in, then break your department up into teams, A team, B team, C team, and only these many people come in that day and the rest work from home the rest of the time. We have working with HR. I have worked with Aaron Riley recently, and we have requested emergency action plans from every department in every building. So if your public works in this building and your public works over here, you have to have 2 different plans. That's for each building and for each department. So we have about, I want to say 105 to 110 plans that he is grading, and we are going to put those into our continuity of operations plan too. So we've adapted very well over the last 3 years as a governmental entity. It's just like when I posted something on LinkedIn, and it was about resiliency and about how we coop every night from our office, because we have go bags that we have that has everything in it that we have to do our job. And we take that with us every night. It does not stay here. So we can work from anywhere and do our jobs. So those are the kind of things we're trying to get departments to practice.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Lopez?
Just a quick, so God forbid things go south and you guys are fully implemented and on your, which I'm grateful that we have a plan. I'm grateful. I've been downstairs. It's been awesome I think you're the right man for this job. But also at what point if some kind of emergency or whatever, at what point do we have to call the National Guard? I mean, like what point where do you have to get there? Or can you call them at any point? But then how, where are we at when that happens?
Once we have that declaration in play, and that's pretty easy to do, it doesn't take much time to write that up and get it sent to the state. Then we can start to request that type of resource. I would caution that most people think the National Guard just shows up for free. That is not true. There is a very substantial bill that comes with that, because just to bring in even a small, let's say a civil unrest kind of an event where you need a small augmentation of peacekeeping force. Typically that's about 200, because it's not just the guys standing out there on the street that you see. There's a whole lot of people behind them, whether they're cooks, drivers, whatever, that come with them. And it's usually a minimum of a 1-week commitment. And last time I checked, that bill goes about $400,000-$500,000. So and that's my role, right? To bring you the good news and the bad news. Good news is, can we get it? Bad news is yes, but it comes with a price. Secondarily, now, if the state decides they want to support that, then they can pick that up. That's a negotiation to be made. But it depends on the type of event it is and how they see that resource being used. Second thing is that monster doesn't move on a dime. It takes a while to get that spooled up. So it's not going to be a 24-hour response. There's a very few things that the military, either whether it's state guard or national or federal, that they can produce people in a very short notice. Urban Search and Rescue is one of those teams. Fortunately, we have one in Boonville. It's based out of Boonville, but they're spread around this area. So those people, if we had a build, let's take this one. If this building were to collapse and there would be a rescue that needed to be done, they are specialists in being able to go into a compromised building like that and be able to find the people who are still alive and can be rescued and get them out. That group generally can respond in 24 hours. That's still 24 hours. That's a long time. So we have to consider what all those resources look like. And that's where we're going to come to you. We think this is what, talking to the subject matter experts, this is what we need. And we're going to put it at your table to say, should we move forward? And then once we get a nod of yes or no, we take that back into the EOC and we tell our partners to go after it and get it done. So that's kind of how that works. So there's resources to be had, but they all have a little bit of this and a little bit of that you got to be aware of.
Did you say Boonville?
Boonville, Missouri.
Boonville, Missouri, where
Yes.
there's farms and no buildings?
Yes, correct.
And they're specialists in recovery from a collapsed building?
That's where they are. They're regional, and I forget, I want to say they're broken up into 10 regions like the rest of the world, but that's where the regional headquarters is. But it's really just a warehouse. It's where they keep all their stuff.
And what,
People come from fire departments mostly, but other places from all over the Midwest. They'll come from Chicago. They usually give them a 4 or 6 hour response time. You grab your bag, you throw it in the truck, and you go. And I used to personally serve on a DMAT team, Disaster Medical Assistance Team. There was one that was based out of St. Louis, but we had a Kansas City branch and we had a branch down in Taney County in southern Missouri. And unfortunately, because of my responsibilities here, I really don't have an opportunity to deploy with them much. But that was the same group that we had at the most recent Chiefs event. And they were very instrumental in, I think, in, if not saving lives, certainly helping people be more mobile and get out and not put the load on the hospital. They are very good at that. And they are rolling hospitals. They're a MASH, for lack of a better term. So yeah, there's all sorts of resources like that.
thank you.
Commissioner Hill?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you all for the work you do and for what you've revealed to us on tonight. One question that might be a little bit unfair to ask, but if you don't mind, in just a short verbal answer, even though it's a big question, here we go. I went to Joplin when they had the big tornado and the streets were unidentifiable and FEMA was out there. I'm sure there were other local officials, but I just didn't recognize any. I would like to know from you all, if there was a tornado, say tonight, massive as the one in Joplin, what would be done ASAP? And then where would you start?
Remember that list of priorities?
Mhm.
We know what that list looks like, at least the top 4 or 5.
Mhm.
One of them at the very top always is life safety and protection. So we're not only going to look at the people who might be injured out in the field, the citizens, but we're also going to look at our responders and say, make sure that you're doing this, but you're doing it in a way that you're not going to add to the problem by getting injured or hurt. We understand, believe me, every one of those people are in those jobs because they want to help other people. Sometimes they tend to push too hard. Way to overcome that is make sure they have enough of them, right? So we don't want them out in it too long. We don't want and burning themselves out. And so we have plans for that. So while that first crew is out there doing their job, we're working on how we're going to have a second crew and how we're going to have a fourth and a fifth crew and how we're going to rotate them all the way out and bring in a whole nother team. Again, the resources we have in this region are astronomical and we do a great job of working together. Every one of our hazmat teams, for example, trains together. That's from all over the metro. And that makes it so that it's simple. We buy the same equipment. So that, you know, John can come in and replace Joe or Bob or Cindy, and they all know how to run the same gear. You've had that up for so long, we need to fix it out, we need to swap it, whatever. So all that education can take place. And I think that's our very first thing we're going to look at. And then from there, there's kind of a bit of a Maslow's type hierarchy. So now where are they going to sleep? Where are we going to set up shelters? All that's happening. Susan's got different people in different boxes in that org chart doing those different things. So we're looking at all of that simultaneously. We've run it through as an exercise before, so nothing really should be a surprise, but every disaster is different. If you've been in one disaster, you've been in one disaster. So we have to be prepared for the unknown. Does that get to your question? I mean, it's a big question and you're right, but it's all about doing exactly what we're doing tonight, preparedness. If you got your head wrapped around this just a little bit, you're better off than you were yesterday. And I want you to come down there with a comfort level that we're going to not put you in a bad situation. We're going to put you in a place where you can do well and do good for your people and our people and everybody's people.
Thank you. I got a bazillion other things, but it'll take too long. So thank you.
Reach back to us, please.
David, did you want to speak first?
Yes, Matt, when I managed community in the Seattle area, our community really embraced community emergency response teams. I believe we have a CERT program locally.
We do.
What's really interesting about CERT, it's when a disaster strikes, you try to stabilize your own neighborhood. So there's opportunity through CERT for regular citizens to create their own mini response teams to help the bigger folks stabilize the neighborhood, inventory the neighborhood, because eventually they're going to come in, say what's going on, and you can be informed and say, hey, those 3 houses need to have their gases turned off because fire's too close. Those types of things. We found 5 bodies. We got them over here. You know, it's how active is our CERT program?
I will tell you that it's not where I'd like it to be. In the past, we've had as many as 70 members on our roster. I would tell you right now, we're probably at about 20 or 25. And a lot of that had to do with COVID. It was really devastational and I wish it was just us, but it's not. I've talked to my colleagues across the state and on the other side of the state line, they all felt the same way. That COVID made it difficult for them to want to come back out. They tend to be retired folks, but not always. We'd like to have a better, broader breadth of capabilities physically and mentally. We're rebuilding now. We have a class scheduled for the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of March that we're going to do here. That's a little bit different format than we've done in the past because of the feedback we got. We had some people who signed up and then said, I just can't do it. And then you find out it's because they can't do 3 Saturdays in a row, which is what we were doing before. So we always have to be paying attention to that, make sure we're getting good feedback. And we said, can we do it this way? If we do it on one weekend, you've only lost one weekend, but we're going to do them Friday night, Saturday all day, and Sunday afternoon. And we're going to see how that works. But it's going to be right here. We're going to do it right here in the building in the EOC. We're trying to get our space cleaned up well enough down there to in 2 weeks to have a class. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm sure we can find another space. We meet as a group out at the NRC, and that's been an awesome resource because it's geographically central, right? It takes less load off the folks coming from the west. But all of our equipment to do this training is all here. And so it's just a little easier to do it here. So thank you, sir.
Commissioner Ramirez, did you have another comment?
I did, but more question now for, you were talking about the CERT class.
Mhm.
Required that You attend all three sessions?
To get the certification, yes, but it doesn't mean we can't do it over time. So we've got 2 classes scheduled for this year. So if somebody had to miss a day, they could pick that up in the later fall class.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any questions, comments? Matt, thank you for your overview. Question I would have, you mentioned something about the $400,000 or $500,000 it would take to call in. I think the scenario was the National Guard.
Right.
Under the financial constraints of the unified government or any municipality, would there be reluctance on a director such as yourself or someone in that capacity to not want to do that because of the financial hit to the community?
It's never going to be a reluctance on my part to do it. It's what my job is to do is to give you the options and let this organization make these decisions.
And if I may, would it be prudent for a community of the first class or any community for that matter to set aside a contingency reserve that would address an emergency situation that we've just discussed tonight?
I've seen it done lots of ways, and I think that lots of jurisdictions do it a little differently. So I would say having a fund, we've even talked about it in state statute or legislation this year. And I've represent the Kansas Emergency Managers Association as their legislative liaison. And they are trying to develop that at the state level too. So there's a, I know you know this. There's a bill that has, I think the initial startup is 10 million set aside to help fill the gap, especially for smaller jurisdictions who can't meet the match because there's a match element to it. So I think we have to look at how, I mean, whether we like it or not, it all going to cost something somewhere.
Sure. And it wouldn't just be the small communities that couldn't do it. I think there's economically distressed communities,
Absolutely.
communities that have more volatile chemicals and industry within their borders that would be at greater risk and would need additional resources besides what we can have on hand in a consistent manner. But Mr. Johnston?
Yes, I just want to add to that. I don't think there's ever a reluctance for us to bring in any more resources in our community. We do have to be careful about the ability to pay for that. But when the focus is on the people, that's where our relationship with our higher up governments come into play. Because if we have a disaster that is significant, we need to get our proclamation to the state immediately, and then the governor has to make a statement. Is it severe enough for state action? And that means not only do we show them why it's important for us, but why it's important for the state. Once we get that proclamation, as Matt was talking about, they will then have the ability to send the resources to us, not necessarily charge us, because the governor is saying, activate the National Guard. That's the state's response to us. Same thing can happen at the presidential level. The governor sends both proclamations to the president's office, and the president with his aides come up and say, well, this needs a national response. And if he activates the Guard, the federal government by and large will pay those things. So I've been to many trainings where there is a temptation for the local government to show a response to its citizens, let's call the Guard. But then when they see the cost, they say, well, let's try to get the attention of the state. And so there is a process. And actually that goes fairly quickly because it's all focusing on responding to the incident. And so if we get our thing together to the governor will take assessment and either she'll make a action. If it's really bad, like a tornado, you'll see FEMA be activated by the president and National Guard to respond to community needs. So the incident commands or the NIMS program that Matt talks about, there is so much order throughout the bureaucracies that says if this scenario happens, boom, 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 boom. And who's responsible for those? So it is remarkable if you really want to be part of that, the resources that Matt articulated at the end of this little manual, it is eye-opening. And then again, if you want to be more local, Matt talked about our CERT program. we need more citizens involved to take care of their neighborhoods and help us out in their neighborhoods. So any way we could get the word out for that opportunity, please get in touch with our emergency management director, and we can have the safest community, most responsive community we can have. It's, it does go down to resources, and some of that's human. If we don't have the human resources, we're limited. If we don't have the finances, we're limited. But I think what you heard today is we have a dedicated staff. We will activate and work with our regional partners to respond if and when it happens here.
Absolutely. Yep. And then my last thought about that is that we have a lot of resources within this region, probably more in some cases than the state could supply us. So we're always going to look local, and we're going to try and make sure we can do it. And the mutual aid agreements that are out there amongst us are substantial. So we can do a lot of this without anything more than a handshake and thank you. So.
Well, thank you. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Seeing none, with no further business to come before the governing body, I will adjourn the special meeting. I would entertain a motion
Move.
for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. I'd ask clerk, please call roll.
Roll call, Ramirez.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Kane.
Aye.
Lopez.
Aye.
Minor. Aye. Townsend.
Aye.
Burns.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene